So just a little bit about us. So Lauren and I are now coworkers, which is really exciting. And we've both been coming at this from different angles for much of our careers. So Lauren is one of our Sanity's DevRel specialists. Is that the right title?
That's correct. Good job.
And I'm the head of content strategy relations. So this is our first time collaborating, and we're super excited to be working on this together because it's our goal at Sanity to bridge the gap between content folks and developers. And so the people who build the things that we all need to use as people who create content and manage it and strategize about it. So yeah, we're just really excited to be here and talk about this. We're not going to get too technical, but if you do have questions along the way about anything we're talking about that you're just not sure what we mean, please just put the question in chat and Larry or Paula can ask. But otherwise we'll take questions at the end. We'll have a discussion at the end. This topic always elicits a lot of questions. So don't disappoint us. Do you have anything else to add, Lauren?
No, I think that was really good intro.
All right. Well, then let's get started. Yeah, Lauren's controlling the slides. Yep. All right, we didn't truly practice. We just talked it through. But yeah, so we're here to talk about content. And as we as content professionals know, it can make us feel connected to each other, but it can also create distance. Most of us have witnessed the growth of misinformation and conspiracy theories in the past year or two, or 3 or 4, however long it's been recent, but it's been out there. We can't have missed it. But wielding content irresponsibly can cause harm and sometimes death. As content strategists and designers and writers, we have a responsibility to use our ability to create content to bring people together. Our work should include and not exclude anyone who would want to take part in whatever it is that we're making. So the way most of us are currently handling content is not really the best way. Content that's unstructured or locked into an inflexible container is difficult to manage. You know that content should not be an afterthought, but so often some of us are thinking about it this way, but certainly a lot of our colleagues are thinking about content as mostly text, when in fact it is text and copy, but it's also images and memes and videos and audios and yes, PDFs. And a lot of people are still thinking about digital content mostly as a collection of pages on a website, when in fact it's multiple pages on a website, it's multiple websites, it's on social media, it's in Google, it's in third parties, it's all over the place. And we have to unlock it. We're also not necessarily thinking about content as something that has an expiration date and something that must be maintained. There's often a publish and forget about it attitude as we move on to the next thing. If we're working for products, we might not see content as part of the product itself and the services that we're offering. And our designer friends and even developers and some business people see content as something that we put into prettily designed boxes as an afterthought. I'm sure we've all experienced okay, it's ready for content. And we're like, what? So these are things we have to work to overcome. And maybe half or more of your job might be advocating for people to think differently about content. And the struggle is real. And I'm not going to tell you that you shouldn't have to do that. You shouldn't have to, but you do, because it's a hill we have to climb by being in the content strategy profession. And it's going to continue to be real until we reach a tipping point when content strategy and content design is part of every organization's standard process. And I'm confident that it will come, but in this time in between, we have to shift our way of thinking about how we can collaborate with our colleagues in design, in development, and product, and in the business. Modern organizations are dynamic, and there is information coming in and out from a variety of perspectives and angles and departments. Often, team members might take on many roles to complete a project and work towards multiple organizational goals. And so the potential for chaos is high with this amount of rapid fire information coming at us without a moldable framework that can grow with our content and with our organization. So creating a framework can seem like a daunting task, but it gives us an opportunity to rethink our current approaches to content and produce more empathetic, sustainable, and available work. So how do we do that? Well, we think structured content is a way to create space for us to put our content first, maximize our efforts, and help us connect with everyone in our audience, which is ultimately the goal of why we're creating content in the first place, to create that connection. So structured content is content that is broken into its smallest reasonable pieces, which are explicitly organized and classified to be understandable by computers and humans. Okay, that's an official definition, but what does that really mean? It means taking our content and organizing it into meaningful pieces and creating a model that will allow it to go anywhere, reach anyone, and look any way we want it to without ever changing its substance. So in short, it's treating your content as data, making a single source of truth for all of your content. So I find in talking to people and reading feeds and articles that not everyone thinks about structured content in the same way. Some people think of it as DITA and XML and some other really structured programming languages or markup languages. Other people think about it as, like having headers on a page so that you have some structure to what you're writing. But what we're talking about here is really something in between. It's thinking about content as the parts. So we have content types, which are reusable containers for storing content that has a common structure and purpose. So in this slide, as an example, we have an act and a performance. And then within each content type, there's attributes, which are not a reusable container. Copy and paste error. Attributes are the characteristics for inherent property of something. So here, an act, there's a name of the act. There, we can talk about the act. We can talk about how many years they've been active, the photo with some alt text, what genre they're in. The performance has a name. It has a date and time. It has a venue, a place where it's performed. That performance might be part of a tour. It also has a genre and maybe a ticket link if we're talking about selling tickets. Those things exist as part of acts, musical acts, and performances, no matter if we're talking about a website or an act or actually the people on stage that we're watching perform. So the structure really gets into the heart of what the content is. So they represent actual things that exist in the world and have attributes. Of course, all of these things, they could have more attributes, but these are the ones that would matter to me if I were a ticket seller. So the structure needs to be contextual to be useful. Now, to define the structure of your content, I find it really helpful to start with designing a content model. So a content model is meant to represent the types of content related to your subject or your product or your brand, not just a single interface. So I'm not talking about something that talks about what kind of pages you're going to have on your website. That will come later. But if we start with a boxes and arrows diagram and figure out what the content types are and how they're related, and then add on the attributes, it gives us lots of ways to start thinking about our content differently and thinking about it as the things that they represent rather than what's going on the website. So this is truly a different way of thinking for a lot of people. And to get to a content model, it does take some iteration and discussion with subject matter experts and stakeholders. And it sounds like a lot, but when we take this step back, we can stop duplicating efforts and focus on what matters and stop worrying about what's going to be on the homepage. You'll get to that later, and that discussion will be so much easier if you've already created a content model. And ultimately, this will create more authentic connections with the people you're trying to reach, as well as with the people you're working with, because you'll both have a better appreciation for the work that you do. So in doing this, you define the content based on how our audience thinks about it. So that's how we connect to our audience. Here's just a quick example of the what a structured content outside of an interface looks like. So often we start with wireframes or something, so it's all about layout. But here we're just like, okay, what is the act name? And here's a sample, Fleetwood Mac in this case. We can talk about them. This could be multiple paragraphs, but I just use one to fit on a slide. We can note what year they started being active, so we never have to change that number of years they're active. We can do a calculation. I don't actually have the photo here. I have the file name because that's what it looks like to a computer. And then anything can display that file. We have alt text, so wherever that file's displayed, it can be accessible with the alt text, and it has a genre of rock. That's probably a list of options for you. If you're Spotify, I think there's like 1,200 genres now, which is crazy. I don't understand, but some information architect or taxonomist out there has lots of fun with that. So this now is broken into its reasonable pieces that can be reused in lots of different ways. So this really makes everyone happy because, as I said, you're meeting the audience where they are and kind of addressing it more like their mental model, not as a single specific web page or product help text, but as the information that they need to make a decision, complete a task, learn something new, or even be entertained. It sets up the people who are making things, the engineers, to contribute at their level of expertise while being in sync with each other. The engineers love when we break these content types into the pieces before it goes to them, so that they can build a content platform in a way that supports your content strategy and makes it more efficient to maintain content and extend its useful life. Designers can use the same pieces that everybody else uses to craft endless interfaces by using the defined attributes as building blocks that can be remixed and restyled based on the needs of the users of each interface where they're going to appear. Content creators, whether that's you or someone else, knows the shape of the content, and they can find the best words, images, videos, charts, whatever, to complete them. And you've had that discussion up front. And maybe more business stakeholders can contribute to content development by serving as the subject matter experts for just the pieces that need their input, like choosing appropriate taxonomy terms or adding references to other content or people based on their expertise that none of us would know because that's not what we work in every day. So everyone benefits from having this single source of content to work with more efficiently, create more effective content, and make it easier to find and surface among all touch points, from Google to your website to in-store kiosks to your back end of your content management system when you're looking for content. So what might this look like in practice? Lauren has a great example here about an organization that's near and dear to her heart and maybe some of yours. So I will turn it over to Lauren to talk about this amazing organization.
Excellent. Thank you, Carrie. That was really great. So when I think about a dynamic modern organization that has a complex sort of data set or a complex ecosystem of content with a global audience, I think about the WuTang Clan. So a little background on me being a fan of WuTang Clan. So I first heard their song Cream, which is an acronym for Cash Rules Everything Around Me, when I was around 15. And this was sort of a pivotal developmental stage in my life because at the time, I was also reading a lot about philosophy, particularly how societal structures work together, how the economies work together, capitalism, socialism, all of these different things. So this idea about how cash rules everything around me really sort of just really permeated in my brain with, all these other things that I was reading at the time. So I sort of just consumed everything I could about the WuTang Clan from that point on and really just became a lifelong fan. In fact, I have a youngling now, and she is now second generation WuTang fan. We are a WuTang family. But it wasn't until I became a developer and a content creator that I realized the WuTang Clan really does have a vast, huge ecosystem of content. So if we look at sort of this small cross-section of the WuTang content lake, we see that, this organization represented digitally in a large data set, they have a lot of interconnected, temporary, and permanent relationships. So this is a group of 9 core members. We have RZA, the Jizza, Raekwon, Ghostface, Method Man, Inspector Deck, UGod, Capadonna, and rest in peace, Old Dirty Bastard. In addition to those names, they also have real names and they have other aliases and they have multitude of roles, right? They're not only rappers in this group, they are also writers, they are producers, they make guest features, they are composers. They have over 100 studio albums, over 385 total albums in total. They have a multitude of solo projects, but then you can see sort of in this diagram, they have split off and combined with other musicians and rappers to create side projects. So then they have a multitude of side projects. So in addition to music, they also have films and TV shows and all sorts of visual arts. You have posters, you have print media, you have magazines, you have books, comic books, you name it. WuTang has it. So in addition to this, you've got like a whole host of merchandise, right? So we're talking a wide range of things related to WuTang. And then combined with that, you have a huge, loyal global fan base that stretches across every demographic you can think of. So for our practical use case, let's say that we are tasked with creating a WuTang museum or a WuZeum, if for short. So where should we start with this? What should we focus on? How can we make sure that all WuTang fans are able to access accurate museum information, or anyone who just wants to know about WuTang or know about the museum and how they can get there and what they'll see when they get there? So the answer to that is that we should start with the content and create a model that has reoccurring content types. So if you look here, this is sort of maybe a typical museum content model that you might see for a museum. So you have your content types of a person, a membership, creative work, a collection. I won't read all of these, but this is typically what you might see if someone were to design museum content using the structured content approach. If we sort of zero in on a couple of the content types for the museum, we'll see sort of that broken out a little bit. So we have a person content type, and then we would have the full name attributes, and maybe even you would rethink this attribute, right? Because maybe there's a reason why you wouldn't just want to have the attribute be full name. Maybe you would want it to be first and last name, or first, middle, and last. It just depends. These are all the decisions that you make when you're creating your content model. And again, you have other attributes such as alias. And the reason why that would be an array is because a person could have a multitude of aliases. So you want to have the option there. And then we also have the creative work content type. And you would have a structure where you would ensure that every creative work that was entered into the WuTang content lake would have a title, a published date, who participated in creating the work, what type of media it was, and a photo of that work with alt text. And pulling in the participants, you would want to create a reference or relationship to that person content type. So I want to just point out for a second, if you take a second and really think about in your mind what the typical WuTang fan looks like, whatever you thought about in your mind is only a fraction of people who like WuTang. And so this is sort of why structured content is so great, because you have the chance to build your content and build a model that sort of lessens and decreases the barriers and biases from existing structures and even your own personal bias. As we said before, WuTang sells out concerts all over the world. Everyone loves WuTang. WuTang is forever. It's for the children. It's for adults. It's for humans. So that means any content that you create and any model that you create, you need to make sure that all humans can access it. So I want to talk about sort of this, what does the structured content approach really buy you as a content strategist and this use case, right? So adopting the structured content approach really does allow you to have an inclusive and empathetic structures. It buys you more universal clarity, accessibility, and allows you to focus on sustainability. So let's take a deeper dive into that. So why is something like having an inclusive and empathetic content modeling, why is that important? Well, it's important because we should consider the people that typically don't have easy access to existing products or your content or content in general when we are building out our content models. And that's one of the ways in which we can unlock empathy in our content, is to be inclusive from the start. And structured content allows you to do that. You can produce a model that everyone can use and interact with, regardless of their abilities. And that really does bring people together. People who use digital products come from a wide range of backgrounds, right? And they have different life experiences, very diverse life experiences, and those experiences impact how they interact with the world. So that means those experiences also impact how they interact with content. So in practice, we can say, so universal clarity, what does that really mean? Universal clarity just means that we are trying to ensure that as many people as possible are able to reach and understand and access our content as possible and understand it, right? So when creating our content, think about people who typically haven't had easy access, right? So when you're building your content model, and as we're building sort of this museum content model, we would want to consider things like, how can we, is there a way to build into our museum content model to ensure that people who have limited literacy, for instance, are able to access museum information? Do we need to consider things like socioeconomic factors or internet access or internet speed, including, is there something that we need to build into our model that makes certain information available for offline access? We also need to consider language, right? And cultural differences. So do we need to build localization and personalization into our content model? And also thinking about different approaches to learning. And so some visual, some verbal, some audio, these are all things that you can use structured content to build directly into your model to help provide universal clarity. Another thing within this is sort of validation rules. And this is where I think that content strategists, content creators, and content designers really need to have and should have, and also, on the flip side, developers need to have clear and open communication and work together, because you can build into your content model reminders and requirements to keep consistency, right? So within your content model, let's say you have an article content type, you can build in a summary to ensure that there's always a summary for every article. So every time that there's an article written about a member of the WuTang Clan or something that happened, a news event or something that's happening related to the WuTang Clan, there will always be a summary. And that's important because most people navigate structures, particularly digital content, by scanning, right? So allowing people to be able to see a summary as they're looking for information immediately tells them what they're going to encounter in that section. Also, in terms of accessibility, structured content can help accessibility be a part of the model from the start. So it doesn't have to be an afterthought. It's not a thing that, oh, we already built our content model, we have our content, we've done everything. Oh, wait, now we need to think about accessibility. No, it can be a consideration at the front, and you can build in helpers along the way. So for instance, alt text, you can help people make good choices. Building things like alt text in your content model, as every time that you add an image attribute for your content type, helps accessibility. There are also things like heading consideration. Headings, using headings properly within your content model helps people understand and navigate what you've written, or what the model is, or what they're reading. And it helps people find updated content, and it helps people, again, with the scanning of material to quickly find what they need. It also helps people who are visually impaired, people who are blind, to navigate sections. It helps people with cognitive disabilities to use headings, to help understand how the writers have organized their thoughts, and also people who use keyboard navigation as their main mode of travel through digital products. And, in addition to that, it's just good user experience. It's good for people to be oriented and know what information is on the page. And the best way to do that is with headings, and you can build that into your content model. So the last thing that I want to talk about in relation to sort of the structured content approach in this use case is sustainability. And this idea of, turning our content into data and having a single source of truth that can be used by any channel. So when we do that, we stop the duplication of effort. And that means that you don't have to recreate your content every time there's a design change or when you want to change, channels. So let's say, for instance, the event content type that Carrie mentioned earlier, you filled that out you built that because WuTang does a lot of live events or live Q&A events at the museum, right? So you want to have that, and that's going to maybe first end up on a website or an application, but then that content can then travel over to Twitter, and it's the same information and it keeps consistency and you don't have to repeat it. And it doesn't need to be recreated. It's already there in your single source of truth. It just needs to travel over to its new channel. Another thing in relation to sustainability is efficiency and accuracy. So when you have a single source of truth or a vast content lake where all of your content lives, you don't have the inaccuracy of copying and duplicating content. So if you have, for instance, a model that allows you to have articles like we have here, you can also then take those same content types and attributes and use those to populate Twitter cards or populate other social media platforms. And that metadata can travel with you. So that metadata can also come and live on Facebook and will come and live on Twitter. So you have metadata consistency. And then let's see. So omnichannel experience. So with an omnichannel experience, there are a number of communication channels, right, that we have now, and we continue to have more, and they interact. If you have a content model and you use structured content, you can reuse your information and it can really go anywhere, and it frees you up to have creativity. So in this particular case, let's say that in the archive, you have a bunch of information about past tour dates, right? So that data can then be sent over to a printer, perhaps to reprint archival posters that maybe you want to sell in the gift shop. So this is a use case. And I think a lot of times people think about these sort of omni-channel experiences and different channels and information passing through APIs as being only digital outputs or digital products, right? But it can be also print media. So you can have your content as data and it can go to a digital space like a website or application, but it can also go to another system to produce actual printed output. And along those lines, you sort of have interoperability, which is similar, but it is just the concept of the exchange and sharing of information between systems. And we have a lot of that now. Almost every company has its own information system and lots of tracking of data. So they all need to sort of collaborate and talk and be able to talk to each other. And structured content really makes that possible. When your content is data, it can easily be transported to talk to other systems. And again, another use case of this could be, this WuTang content here, which is a comic book. WuTang has lots of comic books, in case anyone didn't know that. They have tons of comic books. They're all really great. You should check them out if you haven't. But let's say that all of their comic books were stored, and let's say that all the covers were going to be printed as posters to sell as well. You could make that happen through this process. And so the last thing that I want to talk about is productivity. So, and not productivity in the sense of being able to work more, which I think is true. You can, but I don't really think that that is helpful, because sometimes what people really need to do is work less. And I think one of the great things about structured content is it allows you to sort of organize and arrange your content so that you can deploy it quickly and efficiently. And it leaves you more time to work on things and have the freedom to work on things that you care about, but also maybe to do things that aren't work related. Like, I don't know about y'all, but like, you know, that whole concept of your dream job, like working is not a part of my dream. So it's not something that I plan on doing 100% of the time. Like, you know, Rick Ross, who's also a rapper, he says every day he's hustling, but he's not hustling every single day. He also rests. So part of this is, you know, being as efficient as possible so that you can have time to do other things. I think that's it. Do you want to wrap us up, Carrie?
Yeah, thanks, Lauren, for going through all of that. It's super awesome. I love this example. When I first heard it, I'm like, what? How cool. Even as someone who is not necessarily a WuTang Clan fan, it's still very cool and a very good example. So thank you all for being here. I know there are some questions in the chat that we'll get to, but also if you are interested in structured content, we would love for you to join us in May. We are hosting a conference called Structured Content. It's online and in 5 cities around the world: San Francisco, Oslo, Amsterdam, London, and New York City. We will be opening registration within the next couple weeks. So stand by for more. If you go to this, if you go to the website now, you can put your email address in and we'll email you when registration opens. So you won't miss out on that. We will have limited in-person tickets, but not any limits on the online tickets. So we hope you can join us. We're really excited to talk about structured content from the developer angle, the designer angle, the content strategist angle, the product angle, the e-commerce angle, whatever type of organization you work with. There's advantages to using structured content, and we're going to gather people to talk about how they've done that and made their work more effective, efficient, and helped their businesses grow.
Thanks. Yeah, we've got a few questions queued up. We'll just jump right in. Justina had a really interesting question to kick things off. What sort of content or narrative structures are not well suited to content modeling and reuse?
Not many. So going back to the content model and how I think of it as an organizational content model, not an interface model. So if you're creating a website, say based on a content model, that content model will get you about 80 to 90% of your content on your site, but you're going to have pages like a homepage, an about us page, some landing pages that help navigate through the website. Those might not be in your model, but they still lend themselves to structured content in that you can create reusable containers. I think so often people think about structure and reuse as very specific content. And yes, that is part of it, but it's also the patterns that we develop. So even an article is almost all, an article, a blog post, Those are often on websites, but they can be structured. They all have a title. They all have a publish date. They might have an author. They have a body. They have metadata. They might have a category or related topics. There's all these kinds of things that provide the structure. I've seen New York Times uses structured content, NPR uses structured content. The Norwegian news company, NRK, which is the Norwegian news. I don't know if they're like the public news. I don't know. They're like the BBC of Norway, uses it, and they do amazing things with it that you wouldn't like even imagine. I'll have to dig up some of the websites that they're doing with lots of structure on the back end. So, and it's allowed their journalists to collaborate more. That's another benefit that we didn't even really talk about in all of this is collaboration, because you don't have to have someone own a whole thing. Like, I'm sure we all have had problems with people owning a section of the website or a web page, and God forbid somebody else from the organization put their information on it because that's where the users look for it. So structured content lets you to more granularly divide that ownership up of the pieces. So I don't think there's really, when it comes down to it, everything can be structured, but not everything would necessarily need to be modeled. And those are not the same things. I think we need to make sure that we keep the model as its own tool and structured content as more of a bigger picture thing that the model is part of.
Could you stitch that together a little bit more, Carrie? Because I think that's a fascinating distinction between the model and the structure of the content.
So the model is one way to get to the structure. So if we're aiming to break things up into their reasonable pieces to create meaning, how do we do that? Well, you don't have to do a model. You could start, and some people just start coding or they start a spreadsheet or whatever. But the model kind of gets you out of interface mode, gets you out of implementation mode, and just kind of gets you a good foundation. So the model leads to structure, but it's not the structure itself.
Perfect. Hey, I don't think it's an actual question, but I want to point out that Bill observed in the chat, he had a speculation, a hypothesis about the CREAM acronym for the WuTang Clan album. Is it content rules everything around me? Yeah, I had to get that in there. But Felice actually had an actual, I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was saying that's funny.
Yeah. Felice had a question. Can you talk about the tools that you use? I guess, Felice, if you want to chime in, if you want to unmute and elaborate, I'm wondering, do you mean for both modeling and structuring content, or which parts of the process are you looking for tools information about? And you don't have to elaborate. Yeah.
In general,
she's put in the chat that her mic isn't working. So
got it. Okay.
Yeah. So she said in general, what tools are you using? I think we've got a little bit of a hint about what content management.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely use Sanity for our structured content platform, but I mean, as far as like I can only say like what I do for diagramming. So I use like Figma usually if I'm doing any kind of content modeling, but Carrie might do something different. What do you use, Carrie?
I use Miro a lot for my model. That's just my tool, but yeah, there is no one. So yeah, so there's not one tool for content modeling. People use all different things, Miro, Figma, Omnichannel. I mean, I created one in Google Slides today or yesterday. I wouldn't recommend it, but it can be done. Any place where you can put boxes and arrows. There's other programs that make entity relationship diagrams that are also really good for that. They come with all the little connectors if you want to get really into it. But I have, so in the book, Designing Connected Content that I co-authored a few years ago, if you have read that or you look that, you'll see that our models are pretty intricate with the cardinality and how different content types are connected. And you can absolutely do that, but I have mostly scaled back from just like putting arrows and always one way. But it's just easier. And I'm always going for good enough on the content models and not perfect because otherwise you spin in circles. And then I use Excel to start mapping out how to build it in the interface, in the technology. We're working through some processes at Sanity for our own work, including for the conference, to start earlier in the technology tool. But I think it depends on where you're comfortable, where your team's comfortable. Airtable, I think I've never really used Airtable, but I've heard a lot of people using that. Excel, whatever spreadsheet you use. Also Word, Google Docs, I use that for content design because that's where I'm comfortable working. So it really depends. There's just so many tools out there, but there is no one tool that works for the whole process and for everybody. So figure out what your choices are and see how you can make them work.
I would just throw in a +1 for Airtable. I've been using it for some stuff in this area, and it's like it does all the stuff that a relational database does, but in a lot better UI than most. So, yeah, let's go on to the next question from Felice had another question. In general, can you share any tips on how you document and maintain your workflows and processes?
So I did share in the chat link to Andy's wonderful documentation workflow article that he just updated last month. That's excellent. I would encourage everyone to take a look at that. And of course, he has his own tools, right, that he uses. But documentation is super, super, super important. It may seem like it's throwaway, but it's not. It gets you thinking. It starts asking questions early, and it's something to refer back to. It's something that people can pick up. I was out unexpectedly a week and a half ago, and because I had documented what I had been thinking about some of the stuff for our conference website, people could pick it up and go with it. I also did not get to document some of it, and that caused some real hiccups for us. So it really highlighted for me just in this really recent past of how important documentation is, not just the artifacts themselves, but that you all agree on a process from the start. And work through that, iterate on it, try something, see what works, make it better the next time. There's a lot of work to be done early, and it's different than most people have worked with before when you're working model first and you're trying to create a structured content environment. So super important to do it and figure out how it works for you. And I'm constantly iterating on it. I'm sure everyone here, I know Andy is, he just wrote 2 articles a year apart and they're a little bit different because you do more work and you figure stuff out. So just remember that, progress over perfection and constant collaboration and iteration and listening and learning. I don't know, Lauren, do you have anything else to say about documentation?
No, other than you need it. You always need it. You can't really function without it. Particularly, I will just say that particularly the way, if you work collaboratively, which most people do now, and you work asynchronously, which most people do now, or at least a lot of people do, documentation is essential. And I know particularly like in my team, I'm dealing with like 5 or 6 different time zones. And so if we didn't document what we were doing or what was going on when we were working on things, it just wouldn't work. So it's really essential to the way that we work. And I think documentation is essential to any organization. And then within team, documentation is super important.
Thanks. We've got a question from Emily. It's pretty long, but I'm going to go ahead and read the whole thing because I think it's super interesting. Can you provide some ways of thinking of how to join a newer content model, content structure to a mature enterprise design system for digital channels? Say for enterprises undergoing digital transformation, for example. What are some ways we can help keep presentation controls out of the structure or influence making those differences semantic rather than just visual? For example, if the design system has multiple types of calls to action that are meant to be used in different scenarios, what are some ways to think about transferring those visual or squishier scenario differences to the structural layer? Similarly, do you have any recommended resources for thinking about how design components map to models?
A lot.
That's a long question.
Yeah, that's a lot.
In the chat too, if you want to refer to it. Yeah.
So I think as far as starting with the kind of what you and Emily, you got to it is making things semantic. That's a field in your content type. So say I just wrote an article and I used an example. Say you're thinking about a higher ed website, and you have different areas of the site for parents, students, and faculty. And you, depending on which area you're in, you want it to be different colors. You don't want to say, oh, you don't want the authors to remember that, oh, students are yellow and teachers are black and parents are purple. Like, you just want to know that you're writing for students. And then that, so you have a field, say audience, and then you have the selection. So you can build in those things like why are the different CTAs different colors or different types, and think about the purpose rather than the format. So that can go back. So it's probably going to cause you to change your design system, because your design system, if it hasn't been based on a content model or structured content, is probably completely based on display. And it may only work for one product, because you might have different fonts in a mobile app than you do in a website or an ebook or a poster. So there's going to be a lot that you're going to have to rethink when you do that. And if you're prepared for that, that's great. If you're not, you might make more enemies than friends. But I don't have a lot of resources. There honestly are not a lot of resources out there about talking about this. It's something I want to do, but there's actually a webinar, I think it's tomorrow, the Content Wrangler. It's Content Wrangler is doing it with Michael Hagerty-Villa, who is speaking here probably about that topic this summer, is doing a talk, I think, just about that tomorrow. So it's not too late. Go to, I think, content. We can find the link and put it in the chat. But so everything that he does is great. But I don't know if anybody else knows. I'm happy to have more. That they're kind of separate now, and it shouldn't be. So we need to work to bring those together.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm curious. It sounded like your question, Emily, had to do with a specific. Are you thinking specifically about content stuff and how it relates in design systems in particular? I'm inferring that from what you said about components and some of the language in your question.
Yeah, so I typically work with enterprises and they already have sort of enterprise-wide design systems, at least for digital channels, and they are not content model first, and usually kind of like squishing that in as part of a CMS replatforming. So there's such a cost to changing the design system. So kind of awkwardly fitting the model to it, having those negotiations, just sort of wondering, how do you kind of influence that without saying you have to change your enterprise design system that's already like on version 12, for instance.
Right.
And same with components, trying to kind of backwards map components to the model. They're just like kind of in real life problems that I'm always running into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, honestly, if you can start small and pilot some of that to see how much change there is, but if you're replatforming your content management system, that's a real opportunity to at least take that formatting out of the CMS and turn it into semantic components. Okay, we don't need. We see a lot. I don't know, Lauren, you see a lot more of the back end in our customers. A lot of them put formatting in as fields of their content types, rather than saying, okay, we're going to make this decision that a CTA looks like this, and so it has to have these 3 fields. And you don't have to make a decision about which one it is. It just automatically happens. You can choose which one, but make it by purpose. So maybe it's not changing the components, but renaming them so that they're purposeful and intentional rather than format.
Yeah, because I was going to say, like, I wouldn't necessarily think about it or try to map the design components to the models, but think about, like, so you mentioned like CTAs, for instance. You can have a CTA content type that is completely divorced from the design component, but you can have a matching CTA design component for whatever output it's going to be, but they don't necessarily have to map together. They're like having like a Care Bear style friendship, right? Like they're not, if that makes sense, they're not.
Caring is caring.
You don't have to, yes, you don't necessarily have to, you don't have to try to make them fit, and they don't have to fit inside of the content management system. But I know that that's very jarring, particularly on an enterprise level, if you're dealing with a lot of editors and users who are used to being able to control or have something like a palette of a design system at their availability that includes formatting options. So that is like, you're also dealing with inside of sort of these, like, I don't know, it's some behavioral changes too, right? So that a lot of this is rethinking, but also behavioral changes and getting people comfortable on learning the things that they used to do in other content management systems. So part of that is like, I know you don't see the design system and you don't see the color palette, but just know that it is going to be right when it gets to the other side or gets to wherever it's going.
Lauren, I think if you put that Care Bear thing in your next conference talk application, you're a shoo-in. So, hey, but Nicholas had a question. What sort of symptoms show up from not having a content model, or how do we know when we need content modeling?
Oh, I have a good one for this. So before I came to Sanity, I worked at a large public university here in North Carolina. I won't say which one it is, but a very large one. And they did not have this approach, but however, they had a huge, huge dining system. So not only did they have 5 major like cafeterias. They had hundreds of different styles of like restaurants, cafes, and stuff all over campus. And then they had like 2 or 3 satellite campuses. This place is like a mini city. But within the dining system is hundreds of allergens that they have to account for and menu items that they have to post. However, there was not a sort of single source of truth for any of these items, any of these allergens. So anytime a new allergen showed up or had to be added, it had to be added in multiple places. So that included the website, that included the apps and things that the faculty and staff were using, the apps and things that students were using, the things that were available to the public, and none of it talked to each other. And the difference between that is if they had had a content model and used sort of the structured content approach, those kind of updates should only happen in one place and be able to be deployed to all of those different sort of, presentation outputs. So if a new sesame allergen, for instance, comes in, it shouldn't require, 12 people to make that update. One person they should have to go in and do is say, oh, new sesame allergen, there we go. And it sends and goes out to deploys to all these different applications and websites.
Carrie, did you have anything on that or?
No, I think that's a really great example. So yeah, if you're updating the same information in multiple places, that's a huge red flag that you need a content model, or that you're suffering from not having one. When do you know you need one? You pretty much always do. I can't think of a situation where you're not better off by having one. And again, I'm talking about even on the back end. I've worked with some clients in my consulting days where all they had in their CMS that was not going to be changing anytime soon was a giant body field. But we could still create that structure so content was created consistently. They weren't working in a structured content ecosystem, but they could at least create content in this more structured, formatted, consistent way. So the content model helped them, even though it wasn't implemented in their technology. And it really helped them with usability, and thinking more empathetically towards their end users. I'm thinking of one government client in particular. So yeah, even the simplest sites could use one, a site or an organization, just to help you ground yourself in what users need, and not just what you want to say as a business or an organization.
Hey, I just want to mention, I found that the Bright Talk tomorrow and dropped that link in the chat. So if folks want to sign up for that, that's a thing that's going around a lot now. The notion of content in design systems that just is showing up everywhere. And I have a feeling that Michael's going to have a lot of really good stuff to say about that. Hey, I had a question about, you mentioned earlier one of the benefits of nicely structured, well-modeled content is the ability to use it across multiple channels. One place where I have trouble finding good examples of like voice content coming out of the same source as other kinds of content. Do you have any success stories in that realm from Sanity or any other experience you have?
Go ahead, Lauren. You shook your head yes.
I do, but I don't know if we're allowed to talk about it.
Yeah, we can't really talk about our client work. Can you talk about it anonymously?
Yeah, can you anonymize it? Yeah, no, I love that.
Let's see. Like, so are you thinking specifically just audio-based things?
Well, yeah, no, that's
or voice activated.
Yeah, I was thinking of like Preston So's book, his voice usability. I forget the exact title of the book. He talks in there about an example at the University of Georgia where they sourced like phone tree IVR content from a Drupal CMS, and but it didn't really. I gather he doesn't go super deep, but I gather that it didn't like work out exactly as planned. So but that was a few years ago too. So I'm just wondering how that has advanced. Or or whether, I guess maybe the more generic question I'm asking is there still a need to, or how do you accommodate in your structured content scheme different channel, like for channels that require, like in voice, you need, for example, different utterances for some situations, whereas in a website, you just say it one way all the time, that kind of thing. Have you dealt with situations like that, or?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I don't mean to.
I will.
Yeah.
I will just say that, like, I think specifically related to that, Sanity is very good at localization and personalization, and you can make those particular things happen. And there are definitely clients who are making cultural changes, not just translation. So sometimes you think of like instructional, if you're making instructional things, and that could be verbal or written, right? And so that's something that's going to voice instructions maybe, but it's the same instructions and it needs to be translated. But within that translation, there's maybe some nuance, right? So you also have that going on. You have cultural translation and localization and all of that happening. So Sanity can definitely make that happen.
Yeah, and as you say that, I'm realizing that it's probably just a different application of that same solution that you've already identified and implemented, that like you just need some different voice stuff. So just as you would have like different levels of stuff in tech support content or different menus for different cafeterias and food requirements or something. So thanks. Sorry, I didn't mean to sidetrack.
Yeah, no, I think voice, I have not dug into it a lot, and not recently, but voice is a weird thing. And it's because part of it is, okay, how do we store the content? But how do you make a smart speaker or a voice activated assistant find the right information? Unless you're using a specific skill or something. So I don't want to go into that, but and I know I see Jesse put in, I think jargon must be another tool that stores content. I just want to caution people about the idea of structured content is you don't need multiple systems to store for different channels like we do now. So sometimes you have to, for one reason or other. Sometimes it is a good idea if you truly have a very specific use case for very specific content that's not ever going to go anywhere else. Great. But think about that and think about, are we just creating yet another system with another set of content that has to be updated when something changes? So yeah, I'm not going to say that tool itself is not right, but like think about that when you're creating this and think, okay, and if you are working in the voice world, figure out how these things happen. I mean, there are experts out there who are working on this. So yeah.
Oh, and Andy just put an example in the chat of opening hours, or a good example of voice translation content, that you have it structured as times, and in the voice interface, it says opens at, closes at.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think did I miss any, if I missed anyone's question, feel free to unmute and chime in. I think I got to everyone. I wonder if we can get Andy to elaborate a little bit on his, that structured content, the article that you shared, Carrie. Did you, that was in particular about the workflow. Is that why you shared that one, Carrie?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Because Andy is a workflow monster, I can tell you that.
we'll just need to get Andy back to speak to us again. Some of you may, if you are any of the local people, may recall. He has spoken to our group before, but back in the before times when we were in person. So we're hoping to have him again, and of course hoping to at some point be in person again. But Andy, please chime in here if you want.
Yeah.
Sure, happy to. I don't want to walk over anybody's. I don't want to barge in, but if there are any questions about that, I'm happy to talk about it.
You know, Andy, I have one that you and we've run into each other in the knowledge graph community a little bit as well as other places. And I just shared a link in the chat to the knowledge graph conference that's coming up, because there's a content track now that and when you think about the stuff that, like, you know, and Netflix is going to be speaking there. Aaron Bradley is co-chairing the content track. You know, so there's some cool, and I know that you've done some work in that area. Can you talk maybe a little bit about the role of knowledge graphs and ontologies and kind of semantic technologies in structured content?
Sure. I mean, I think that voice question is a good example. So things like opening hours, or even menu items, delivery options, that you have gluten-free items in a menu, all of that is stuff that can be in structured content. And then if there are vocabularies like the open graph protocols, or the kind of things that you'll see for SEO for marking up structured content as Twitter cards, all of that stuff is crawlable by algorithms. And you have an agent like the Google search algorithm or Alexa that can pull that information out of a website and then give a voice response to someone, even if you haven't done the work to build a skill or to build an application. But that if you were to ask, this was in a recent article somewhere, if you were to ask, hey, voice assistant, how do I get gluten-free delivery near me? It's able to pull those pieces of structured content together just from the things like the SEO stuff we're marking up, like in open graph tags or Twitter cards. And it's something that we get for free, but until you have structured content, as long as you have, like Carrie mentioned before, your content in a big blob in the body field, you can't do that systematically. You have to go through, and like Lauren mentioned, anytime there's a change, now you're changing every page, and those are never systems that work. So like it all starts with that well-structured, granular content that can be machine operable.
Thanks, Andy. Hey, Paula, did you have anything last? I know you sometimes have things.
First of all, I want to thank Carrie and Lauren for, aside from being here tonight, from being here at what is now nearly 10:30 p.m. for them. So I appreciate them staying up to be here and to talk to our group. Terrific discussion. I know for me, there's always just this little bit of cognitive dissonance when I hear something like structure and empathy in the same sentence. So I love how it kind of all comes together. I also wanted to, Carrie mentioned this, but I'm just going to give her another plug. I don't know if you can see this, for the book Designing Connected Content, which Carrie wrote with Mike Atherton. This is a wonderful resource, and if this is a topic you're interested in, please buy Carrie's book. Thanks everyone for being here. As we've mentioned, keep an eye on our Slack channel, keep an eye on our Meetup channel. We did. Hey, there we go. Jesse's got a copy too. We did record this tonight, as you may have seen, so there will be a video available at some point if you want to review or you want to share with anybody. And join us again for some of our upcoming events. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, all.
Bye. Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Thanks, Carrie and Lauren. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.